Bert and Chris, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Chalo. Hi, everyone. And Bill is joining us today from, I'm sorry, was it Great Lakes, Bill?
Yes, Great Lakes Water Authority.
And can you tell us, are you with the asset management team or some other branch there?
I'm on the enterprise asset management team.
Okay. All right, good. Nice to meet you again. So I'm, Mert with Portland Water. Chris is with the Metro Vancouver, trying to sort of, facilitate these meetings, push the content development further. Yeah, sorry, I'm just a little stuck, so I'm going to have a little tea here. And making some progress. So we are focused on the development of an asset management plan, the business process workflow, as well as the enterprise risk management. So we really started discussing enterprise risk management concepts in its earnest last week. I don't know if everybody here was able to attend that meeting. So that's where it started, and we can get you some of the files, Bill, on that one too. So today, really, it's a little more free form today than the previous meetings. So a couple of things that we can actually discuss was I wanted to just give a quick update on the data, at least from my perspective regarding asset lifecycle costs. I think it was maybe not the last one, but the meeting before that one. I shared the work order data. I was able to work with our CMMS folks to extract for the pumps and pump motors, and the work order data being, for corrective maintenance, preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance, and so forth, as well as labor, material, and equipment costs we've been tracking. So there was some good comments actually from some of you who's on this call today in terms of maybe we can actually extract some additional information just to make the separation between corrective versus preventive maintenance out a little better. So I've worked on that. I've also figured out that certain costs are actually not tracked fully, at least in our CMMS, not in our financial system that covers it all, but in our CMMS, when you see a cost for labor, it is only the direct expense, and it is actually only the maximum of a salary range for the position making the the repairs or the maintenance activities basically. So it's always good to, I guess, learn the metadata behind the data. So I've gotten that actually last week from the revised information last week from our CMMS folks again. I just haven't had a chance to really sit and then do any sort of trending or graphs or charts or analysis yet. I was just curious, just to sort of lay out the question out there out of the participants here. Has anybody had the chance to sort of look into whether or not they were very successful? At least I don't know if you tried, but you tried to get any data. Do you know what kind of data you have in CMMS that could potentially help to use as input into our lifecycle cost model? Just to sort of lay it out there. Just raise your hand if you want to comment or just speak. That's fine.
Yeah, Mert, this is Casey.
Okay.
I know that what we have is not very useful on that. I would love to have it, but I know that we just don't.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't tracked whether anything is either maintenance or repair, and we generally track just the general labor, but we don't track any other costs associated. We don't track equipment or vehicles or anything like that as well. So our data is pretty sparse right now, unfortunately.
We have our data quality issues as well, kind of I was mentioning a few of them just then. But at least we have, luckily for us, we have some information we've been tracking since about 2011, 2012. So it's about a 10-year window. So that's relatively good. Again, unless you dive into it and somebody had to tell me, oh, you know what, this is just a direct labor cost and it doesn't include any of our overheads. I wouldn't know. So, we can't really rely on it right off the bat, but we can try to apply some corrections to it that could help.
The
So
other thing that we did here in beginning 2020, which was fortunate timing for all of us, right? We did a complete system called our FLIP project, but it was a functional location improvement. So we took all of our assets and basically renamed them with new functional locations and new asset numbers under the functional locations. And part of that was to improve how we collected data from now on. Before then, many of our work orders and things were just on anything done at a pump station might be just thrown under the general functional location of pump station. Don't know what it was. Maybe it was fixing the roof, maybe it was fixing the electrical equipment, maybe it was rebuilding a pump. So can't really break it out. But what that, and the history did not come across with it, which in our case isn't that bad.
Challenge.
Yeah, it isn't that bad. But what it means is we've only started collecting data the right way beginning 2020. And even then we've not yet started collecting it on what's preventative, what's, reparative. So,
okay, baby steps, I guess,
So we're not much help, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I appreciate you commenting and I appreciate you at least looking into it. Obviously, if you don't have it, we don't have it. It's fine. And I'm happy to put forward our data after I have a chance to make some of these corrections. Yeah.
You might want to, maybe Deb and Ben want to weigh in from MCES and Bill from Great Lakes before you do that.
Yeah, I'm not doing it today anyway. I just, I'll do it later. But yes, sure. Please, anybody else wants to chime in, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in, Mert. At Metro, we started collecting the, so we developed the asset hierarchy and implementing the asset hierarchy in our CMM system. And we can, I think, track the cost, not just the labor, but also materials to each sort of asset types that we own. So I mean, I can run the analytics and provide that as well to the group and share with the group. So because I mean, as Casey said, our sort of ongoing challenge has been around the work order is sort of cut against the entire pump stations, even though it was specific to certain assets. So that development of a hierarchy was a milestone for us, so that we can track our cost to it. And we do have those different maintenance types, like the preventive maintenance, corrective maintenance, and others. So I think we can throw that angle to that analytics as well.
That sounds good, Chris. Anybody else who wants to add before I dive into maybe make the Excel template that I've been noodling to get this done?
Yeah, this is Ben. I was just going to say that we were probably fairly similar to, as Chris said, we can look at both the sort of preventative and restorative work orders and differentiate those costs. Materials costs are a bit sporadic. Sometimes they're included fairly well, other times they're not. But the work labour costs are relatively consistent through the piece, but we've never really run the analytics to kind of roll them up into sort of asset classes and individual, So if we're looking at pumps, for example, so we've got some work to do to kind of roll things up and actually start using some of these figures for predictive work in the future.
Okay. So that tells me a couple of things. Perhaps because we have our data separated between labor, on our end, labor, equipment, and materials, we can probably take a look at each of those individually and then compare that with, even though it may not be at the asset level, compare that with the labor you're tracking individually on your assets, not assets, sorry, but at the pump station level, if that's what you have. With the understanding that you'll have to make some assumptions really on, where most of the labor is spent in that environment, just to see relatively if the numbers are somewhat jiving at least. Great. Well, thank you for sharing that as well, Ben. Scott is asking energy costs. So yeah, so exclusively we've talked about, I mean, I've been talking about exclusively for maintenance. We do not have energy costs tracked at the individual asset level. I really haven't come across a lot of utilities that do that. I think that we cannot worry so much, but we can probably average that out if we are tracking run hours. And then if we happen to know the of the horsepower, and if you happen to know like some of the efficiencies of the equipment we have. So there may be ways to get around that. Does anybody have any comments on tracking energy costs?
Well, we're not tracking costs directly, but we are looking more at how we track energy usage. At the moment, we're at the kind of high level process area rather than getting down into individual assets. But where we are looking at applying it is that we're subject to energy curtailments on several times a year, and we're required to get below a certain amount of usage. So that's quite useful to us to understand, which processes are using the most amount of energy and where we need to concentrate our efforts if we do come into a curtailment, depending on the plant conditions at the time, where we need to direct our efforts to get below the limit that we've agreed with the utility company.
So I'm guessing that's kind of like a summer thing for the most part, Ben.
It is, yes, but we also, for the electrical usage tends to be, but also we do it with gas as well, because we have a number of it. We have incinerators that we use to burn solid waste at our largest wastewater plant, particularly. And gas curtailment can actually be trickier to manage than the electrical ones. So we're looking at ways of better monitoring costs for both gas and electricity.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. So let me then describe. I wish I had the time to have put something together for this meeting. I don't, so I'm going to try to describe it to you all. And then you'll try to use your imagination to basically imagine it. We have set aside some meetings to talk about this as part of the core group, so I'm hoping we can actually start putting together the template in preparation for our meeting in 2 weeks' time. But borrowing from our approach document that we all reviewed a couple of meetings back in its final, let's call it final draft form, we are going to be focusing on the pump and the pump and motors, basically under sort of mechanical type assets classification as our sort of star of our template. And then the idea is that the template is going to be designed in such a way that, we can substitute some of the coefficients and the decay curve shape factors or whatever else, basically variables, so that if we are talking about like a concrete sort of civil structural asset, the percent annual corrective maintenance as a percent of asset replacement value numbers, for example, we can change those as a function of what kind of asset type or asset category we are talking about. So, but we'll develop the template around the pumps and pump and motors first, and then we'll make some of these accommodations for other asset categories and types. The idea is going to be for each of those lifecycle cost components be listed. Operating cost, corrective, preventive, predictive maintenance, and so forth. We are going to be assigning a coefficient, if you will, I actually call it a shape factor, but there will be a number there for first. Actually, you know what? Let me take a step back. First of all, there will be a shape for the time series shape for the activity we have in mind. For example, preventive maintenance. Let's take that one. So once we settle out of the warranty period, we'd better have our preventive maintenance strategies figured out for that asset. So once we know what they are and once we know what the frequencies are, it's actually not that difficult to be able to note the average annual preventive maintenance cost over time. Now we could track it for labor, materials, and equipment separated out. The idea being that it's most likely is going to be a, relatively constant curve, like, y equals, I don't know, 3 or whatever, like, we'll figure that out, but it will basically be a constant number into the future. Now, how big it is in terms of like as a percent of the asset replacement value, yes, that's what we're going to have to figure out. So I'm going to rely on the data we've been collecting, and perhaps if you are able to get the data on your end for the labor cost, even though it's not at the asset level, it's at the pump station level, we could still leverage that perhaps. The idea being that we are going to have, okay, it costs us on average 1.2% of the asset replacement value to dedicate on average, again, on a per year basis for preventative maintenance activities. So we'll call that out. And that's one of the relatively easier ones. On another example, when we are talking about corrective maintenance, I think we'll have to decide how the corrective maintenance intensity changes over that particular asset type and asset category's life cycle. I think some of us are familiar with, let's say, an electrical or some sort of instrumentation asset failure actually being pretty random. So if you look at those, failure curves like A through F in the RCM methodology, you'll notice that electrical assets will fail around, like, it's their failure rate is constant regardless of time or run hours. So, so there is not really a, like a condition decay curve from corrective maintenance perspective. So it could really hit at any time. So we could actually utilize that approach for electrical asset corrective maintenance curve. And it's basically not as dependent on time. However, if we switch gears and we look at assets with more variable parts, such as the pumps and the pump motors we are talking about, I think they will have a more direct relationship to run hours, or if they are absent, then age over time of these assets. So that we'll have to define together what that curve is. We can put forward a, like an example, but we can tweak that a little bit, obviously. But there will be that change over time that will translate into increasing average annual corrective maintenance cost over time on a per year basis as a function of assets replacement, initial replacement value. So we'll come up with that, and we'll be basically adding that on a per year basis. The same thing for predictive maintenance. That will be like another row, another line item there. And depending on the complexity of the asset or the importance of the asset, its criticality, we'll have one or more, maybe zero if it's not critical, but predictive maintenance activities lined up. We have these huge pumps. We basically do whatever is under the sun in terms of predictive maintenance to them. Vibration, oil testing, thermographic readings. We'll take care of all that. We'll do insulation resistance tests on the motors, for example. Anyway, so we can define those. We'll need to come up with a way to define them, like in terms of like given a replacement value, the amount of work, predictive work we do to those assets will need to increase to, so we'll have to define that relationship as well. But the idea is that there is an average annual cost associated with those activities as well, which we can insert. I think I'm going to have to go back and look into what kind of operating data we have in terms of run hours on our pumps, because to go back to Scott's earlier comment, that can actually help us with, some estimate of operating costs too. Again, as a function of the horsepower of the pumps, we can throw in some assumptions there for combined efficiency loss, between like the drives and the motors and so forth. And then we can actually track that somehow in terms of a dollar value. But remember, yeah.
So I was just going to say, Mert, you covered quite a bit in what you outlined. Maybe getting some feedback from others. Does that make sense? Are there comments that you have about that overall methodology that you described. Does that make sense to others, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very open to any feedback. I just want to add one more thing, Scott, before I finish, and then
Sure.
I'll give the floor. And that is when you basically all these components of the life cycle we add together. And then on a per year, you can stack them up, right? So this year's corrective maintenance estimate is X, preventive maintenance estimate is Y, and so forth. So there will be a combined cost profile as a result. That is actually a good indicator. That is something that you can actually take and make decisions out of in terms of optimal renewal of an asset from a financial efficiency perspective, because it's costing us a lot to keep it going in this configuration. It could also help. It could also be an input into a business case, because when you do a life cycle cost and business case, we compare the increase in life cycle cost over time of an alternative with the interference cost to fix it, and then the corresponding risk profile if you have it monetized. So that's another thing that we can link to down the line. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to basically ask for your Rove initial gut feels, good or bad, for brainstorming purposes.
So yeah, I mean that's a good idea, Mert. I mean, as we briefly described in the intro documentations for this project, I think definitely we should have some sort of a parametric model to assign some sort of a percentage to against the asset, the replacement cost or the intrinsic value of it. It'll be really helpful to sort of visualize in some sort of like very simple graphic, and how each sort of lines can be developed using what information's coming in. But in general, I like the approach of having some sort of a percentage assignments depending on preventive versus corrective.
And that will be, I think, as an initial placeholder anyway, Chris, because as we mature with our data, there is nothing in the world that says you cannot do this on a per asset basis. I mean, that's why we have computers in the first place. So once we are past the template and the setup and the background information exists that tracks that information in a dashboard for us at a per asset basis, in an ideal world, we can extend this into a per asset optimized renewal decision making discussion too.
Right. And also, that percentage should remain as a variable, depending on which organizations and what sort of asset portfolio they're managing, because it can get significantly different between, utilities in Vancouver versus utilities in Washington D.C. So
right. Yeah, labor cost can be a significantly different.
Exactly.
Different take there. That's good. So one thing that I've done in the past, in case this is inspirational to others, is that when I didn't have the cost data tracked at individual asset level in the data sets that I've gotten from my previous clients, I've basically taken a look at their overall maintenance budget numbers for a whole facility. So because they track work at the facility level, you don't really know what they are doing specifically inside the facility. But there is an overall preventive maintenance cost number or overall labor hours, for example, for that whole facility, like a pump station. So you could actually take a look and then compare that number to the replacement value of the whole thing. Now, obviously, you'll have to slice and dice it, divide things into 4 categories generally, electrical, mechanical, civil, structural, instrumentation, and so forth. And now you can play with those numbers so that it's like I don't know if you use like Solver or GoalSeek in Excel, but it's kind of like a regression model with like 4 coefficients. So you can actually come up with some alternates. But anyway, I'm going to stop there because I think we are going beyond the scope, at least our initial take. Anybody else want to?
Deb had her hand up for a minute, and then maybe she took it down. But Deb, did you have a comment?
Well, my first comment was, because I'm a red, is I thought computers were used for dating. Ha ha ha.
Yeah.
But my other comment would be, going back with what Chris said, that there are definitely going to be variables to cost, because again, depending on region, types of wastewater facilities you have, what's going on. we will have those cost variables and who you're buying, who you purchased from, etc.
Yeah. And you know what we can do probably also is, I don't know if this would be helpful or not, but we could even, perhaps there's an opportunity to use some sort of a construction cost index or consumer price index of one area versus like another, to even suggest, hey, if we are suggesting a number here, like 1%, it's based on our estimates in like, I don't know, like Pacific Northwest or something. And then later on, when somebody in, I'm gonna pick a state where, in my relatively narrow opinion, life is cheaper. I don't know, like maybe, oh yeah, I'm sure I'm gonna regret this, but I'm gonna say Oklahoma. If it's cheaper there, I mean, you could probably make some adjustments. It's cheaper to ship there, perhaps, and it's cheaper to install it in the first place. So there's like, costs are lower. So we can maybe use some in this index of some sort to account for that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Casey, Bill, Ben, any comments?
This is Bill. Yeah, it's a lot to digest, but it's a good conversation you're having right now about trying to normalize the data, because that's the first thing I was thinking of is, you're trying to talk about it on a international scale, or I don't know what the audience is, but yeah, trying to regionalize it and bring it down to some measure that everyone across the board can understand it. But another thought on that was most of the large utilities are going to be in areas that are probably more urban and are going to be more expensive to own and operate anyway, I would think.
So yeah, then maybe like a city-based index could be helpful, because relatively, like that probably gives an idea of how expensive relatively things are to each other. So that may, again, I'm convincing myself a little bit to think about this a little. It may be worthwhile to look into this index idea to try to use it as a normalizing agent. That probably is not the right term, but I think everybody knows what I'm trying to talk about. I'm sorry, Casey, I interrupted you perhaps.
No, you didn't at all. But I was going to say that IAM has some interesting documents on this. And basically what you're talking about on that optimal life cycle is a bathtub curve of, your annualized replacement cost goes down over time, and your maintenance cost stays relatively level over time, maybe increasing a bit, but your risk of failure cost, climbs at one rate. And it's the sum of all those curves. It's called a bathtub because it drops pretty quickly. It kind of flattens out, and then it slowly ramps back up. And, you try to find that lowest point in there at the optimal life cycle replacement. And there's some good graphics that IAM has. I'll try to find those for us.
Yeah, if you can, it may help us, at least organize our template, able to at least follow that.
Yeah, it's a good visual.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be good. I've actually seen or used some of that too, but if you can find it, great. Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say is, it's good to remember that we're looking, and it's obvious, but we're looking at this statistically. And so regardless of kind of the size of the equipment, the different equipment classes, maybe really large horsepower motors, are different than lower horsepower motors, but we're not really trying to say, these have this costs on these years. We're trying to say statistically across them, they increase. And my recommendation, at least at first, would be to leave the cost corrections out of it, those economic factors out of it, because I think there's just too much to worry about there. If you have that curve, and we can all, regardless of the scale, if we all kind of agree on that curve and we're finding our data, supports that curve, then you can use that across the board and scale it after the fact. If we try to scale ahead of time, I think we're just adding a little bit of, you're adding some noise to the equation. So that would be my recommendation, is that, we're going to get a nice curve, say for large horsepower, motors, pumps and motors, and that can apply across the board to anyone. But then it's each utility will adjust it based on, well, I only, I have 2 redundant, only one runs at a time. They run half time versus full time, or my power costs are much higher than somewhere else, or because I'm a water utility, I maintain these to a higher standard than if I were a wastewater utility, or, so everybody can make those adjustments, but you're kind of sliding that whole scale up and down. You're not bending the curve too much by those things.
Yeah, these are excellent points.
Yeah. So I would say, the old rule of, keep it simple to start. Let's collect what we know. Let's, try to build a curve and then, confirm the curve with the data we have. And that'll help us get the shape, and then the rest can be adjusted after the fact.
That's good.
So Mert, just
yeah.
Another quick question of the team, and maybe it doesn't apply because you're dealing with it sort of at a programmatic type of level, but I'm wondering, I hear a lot about this, that supply chain and the length of time it takes to get replacement equipment is a factor. I know in the electrical side that I'm hearing a lot about that, but does that factor in at all, or are you just making your programmatic decisions and then you decide which ones to do on a priority basis or something?
Yeah, so the failure modes with things like obsolescence or difficulty to, sort of get parts within the, like level of service timeframes, Scott, I'm actually thinking, that can still be incorporated into the timing to take action, outside of the life cycle cost. If that's, I don't know if that makes sense, but that could be part of some of our risk discussion, perhaps. Not that, life cycle cost, but the risks.
Or part of your decision criteria that you use or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It would go more to the risk cost. You're right that it applies to the replacement planning, but if you're doing this, if you're doing proactive replacement planning, you kind of factor that in and back time it to, for your known delivery. But it really does affect your risk, because if you have an unexpected failure, it really drives up that, the cost or the downtime, that sort of thing. So it really affects the curve more on the risk, and the risk does factor in, just like, the higher replacement cost does.
If I had my way, Casey, I would want to not only tell me the recommended spare parts, in your O&M manual for these assets I'm buying, but also tell me your, delivery time frame for them to my location. And if it were to change, 30% of what you told me in the future, I'm expecting a phone call from you, sort of thing. So, I would want to get some of those things into specification text, right. But I think I'm ahead of my time there.
It's a good thought. There's 2 things with it. There's it's the initial support when you buy it, and they say, oh, well, this is new equipment. We make parts for it. We carry parts for it, and we can FedEx them to, we have them on the shelf and we can FedEx them to you. Or they say, this motor shaft we make as needed, and it's going to be an 8-week lead time under normal situations. You can factor those in.
Yeah.
And then there's the, the pandemic factor kind of thing of, right now you might want to say, it's hard to call every manufacturer and say, hey, if I ordered something from you, what's the lead time would it be ahead of time right now? But you might just say, okay, due to current situations, economy, economic factors, supply chain, we want to double those, across the board. Right now, we might just say double them. You're not going to hit them all right, but overall, you're going to kind of raise that, level of know that you're carrying a little more risk right now than you would later.
Yeah, and in an ideal world, I'd like to know if that's the case, because my expectation is that, okay, I'm willing to wait a month and I'm willing to absorb that risk. I'm not willing to wait for 4 months, for example.
Right. And it's always it's the benefit versus, the effort versus reward on that. You could absolutely get all that by calling your manufacturers and asking about, your major parts. But you could spend a lot of time doing that, you know, a lot of man hours kind of calling all your manufacturers and figuring that out. It's going to change kind of week to week, and B, you've spent a lot of money just doing that, a lot of time and effort that may not pay off in the expanded risk. You know,
That's why I was trying to put it
you
on
could
that.
probably make an assumption, you know, quickly, and, you know, say double your risk, and you would be within the ballpark and not spend time on it. You know, cardinal rule: don't spend more time, you know, analyzing something than it would to repair it.
To replace. Yeah, exactly.
So
that's,
there is a, you know, you do have to watch out. I'm like you. I would like to know every piece of data, but I also don't want to be the maintenance guy that has to call everybody and ask about every part, you know.
So that's why I was trying to put it on the manufacturer during the equipment, you know, commissioning, like, you know.
Absolutely. But you're going to get a slice in time right then. I mean, you're going to get right now, this is our slice, but, you know, you'd have to update that information. And
so that's why I was hoping that if it changes beyond a certain level of tolerance in delivery dates, that's what I was expecting.
Yeah.
That, you know, they let you know, like that.
I would suspect that they, you know, a couple of things. A, they don't want to call you up out of the blue and tell you that their service has decreased. And, you know, and they may not know, you know, I mean, they're, you know, the vendor for multiple lines, you know, may not be tracking that exactly, and, you know, until you ask. But I'm with you. I would love to know it. I just don't know an easy way to get it and keep it updated.
Yeah, so at a minimum, this discussion is making me think that when we are implementing our new maintenance management system right now, well, when I say implementing, it's going to take a couple of years. But I said that, you know, we don't use it now, but I wanted to do like category A, B, C for, you know, like inventory and spare parts. Maybe some of you are familiar with that concept. So I think for category A items where they are generally difficult to get, expensive, long lead time sort of things, I think that may be worthwhile to spend our own time on that. And maybe the rest is less important. I'm sorry about I interrupt somebody there.
Yeah, Mert, we haven't heard from Nomi. He joined late, but maybe we want to get his reaction to some of the discussion if he feels comfortable with that.
Yes. Hi, Noemi. How are you?
Good. It's she.
I screwed up. I screwed up.
Yes, okay. That's fine. I was just listening. We are so far behind on this. So I'm just listening and trying to get you know, learn a lot and try. So what I'm gonna do is after this meeting, I'm gonna listen to the recording again and try to kind of apply that to our system. But we are super far behind, I think. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
No, I mean, just can you, maybe you haven't seen this, but I think we can get you the our scope approach final draft document too, because that will, I don't think you were involved during the development of that. If I don't remember when you joined.
Yeah, this is my second or third meeting, I think.
Okay, so you may have missed the details on that one. So if you want to look at that first, it's only like 2 pages, and then read and then watch the recording. That may help the concept, you know, visualize it a little easier. I mean, despite my extremely impressive communication skills, I'm kidding, you know, the opposite.
No, I mean, I have been following, but I need to kind of see, you know, and apply it to our, you know, our case. So I just have to, I have to observe it first.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And 2 things that I want to be able to show just to make the discussion a little easier in about 2 weeks' time is that, so the analysis of our maintenance data for our pumps and pump and motors. And then the next thing I want to do is, oh, by the way, on that one, like I couldn't even get to horsepower, so I have to manually bring in the horsepower to those pumps later. But anyway, that's a me problem. And then the other thing is the template itself. That can actually help the discussion. So I have a little homework to do, but I'm hoping that, you know, the core team here and those who are willing to participate can, you know, sort of step in and maybe we can work on it together.
Yeah, that would be nice. So one question I have is that I think one of the problems is that we use Maximo as our CMMS, and we don't have all that data in there. Some of it is. So how do you manage it? How do you, because it seems like you need all that, like the specification part of it to kind of analyze the data or do this analysis.
Yeah, so lucky for us, we track the maintenance, labor hours, materials, and equipment, like separated out on a per asset basis. So that's, for us, we've had that for a while. To be, since we are among utility partners here, I don't think we've leveraged the data as much as we could have. We've been collecting it. So this is really, I'm relatively new here personally. So this is really one of those first attempts to, to really look into it and try to make use of it. This project, I'm just using this project as also to extend some of my internal, aspirations on like, okay, we should be looking at this data more and we should be using this more. Maybe you can take the product of this analysis and take it to your respective, departments and say, hey, maybe we can do something similar if we start to collect it a little differently. Because collecting the data is actually even worse than not collecting it if you're not going to use it at all. Like then you spend the money to collect it, and then you don't use
That's
it.
True.
So I wanted to move us from that to even more. So we have like a pretty robust predictive maintenance program, for example, but for that data, and because they are so specific, we rely on the specific predictive maintenance vendors, proprietary software, because there's no way the CMMS is able to absorb all that business logic in it. By the way, we are going to be implementing Infor public sector, also known as Hansen. So that's the one we selected. So it's an exciting time, just a lot of going on at the same time.
It might be good, Mert. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the future, but to hear from the different participants on what software they're using, how successful is it, what's missing, kind of as a group, kind of critique, what works and what doesn't work, that kind of thing. That would be useful. And there are also some that are in the process of acquiring software, and this might be real helpful to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
My past experience up until a few years ago was Infor public sector.
Okay.
And it's, I don't know if it's the best. It was the first system that I used and cut my teeth on. I think it's very useful. Where I am now, we're currently using SAP, and it's a very strong program, but not very user friendly at all.
Mm-hmm.
So every one of them has its trade-offs, I'm sure. The best advice when switching systems, I think I can give is, try to convert as much data you can and try to use the system as much as possible in the way that it was designed.
Out of the box sort of thing.
As much as possible out of the box. Don't, if there's a field there that you can use, try to use it, if without creating something specialized.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we all have to, they all need to be specialized to our individual needs, but as much as you can use it, upfront out of the box, I think would be the better.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
So I see that Bill had his hand raised, and Ben, you might have wanted to say something too.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Ben. He's already. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay. No, I was just going to say to that point that Casey just made that we're in the process of developing requirements for our new EAM system. And one of the decisions we've already made is exactly that no customization, where we're going to do absolutely everything that we can do to avoid having to customize the system. The only issue, I know you said that I think you're using Infor across the entire city organisation rather than not just the water utility, aren't you? And we as well are having to, we're choosing a system based on the requirements of our wastewater and transportation requirements as well for our trains and buses as well. So we're having to look at all that, but customization is something that we're staying well clear of, because we want to make sure that we are getting the most out of the system, and if that means modifying our processes, then that's what we're going to do before we try and customize anything.
Yeah, customization reduction will save lifecycle cost, software ownership lifecycle cost substantially, because I've called a bunch of utilities when we're doing reference checks, when we had a short list of 2 vendors. And generally speaking, customization meant annual, external contracts to, accommodate updates. I'm sorry. Yeah, Bill, your hand was up earlier. Did you want to comment on something?
I'll just add that, I agree with you guys. As much out of the box as you can stay is probably better. And there, again, it also relies on, or matters about the size of your database, your number of assets. I think Great Lakes, we have like 20, Great Lakes Water Authority, they have 20,000 assets right now, and that's just vertical. It doesn't include the horizontal system. And I don't know, that might be small, but if you're talking about transportation, I mean, that's going to greatly increase it. But we use the Oracle WAM right now currently. We are in the process of switching over to NextGen. So it's going to be our new solution.
Yeah, I remember liking NextGen. When they submitted to us, I think that's a good pick. I think our super department was very hot and heavy on Infor as well, which is a good product. But I remember liking NextGen for its capabilities. So I think I'm thinking you'll like it.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I mean, I went into the whole process thinking I was gonna like CityWorks the best, but I really didn't like I like CityWorks. I've used it for 25 years, but NextGen, they blew it out of the water with their demos. It looked like a really good product.
Cello has his hand up.
Mert, it's really good to have discussion all around, and maybe this would be a nice agenda item to add to the future meetings is this technology aspect of asset management, like the CMMS systems, and people can also post artifacts that in the past we found that when they share different artifacts from their organizations, their peers and other utility partners find value in that. So
yeah, sure.
When we follow up to this meeting, when we plan the next meeting, let's include a session on that. I mean, let's put it on the agenda, and I will say it's about 10 minutes, before the hour. So maybe just to think about if there are additional comments and wrapping it up. And
yeah, I'm thinking when we are developing the lifecycle cost template, if there are any sort of CMMS requirements to accommodate the data for the template, for example, like it doesn't have to be for the template, but like to be able to do lifecycle costing, we can specifically note those as well, and that could be a transition into CMMS discussion a little bit from the lifecycle perspective.
Yeah, Mert, I mean, we'll have time to talk about this. We don't have to do it here, but one thing we haven't really covered so much, we've been talking about the technical aspects, what the data is, what it looks like, what the needs are, but there's also the business process associated with all this. And, it would be good, as time allows, to you or Chris or somebody else to kind of lay out what that business process looks like for, the consideration of this asset management or this asset plan, and what the different components and roles and responsibilities and activities and that kind of thing.
Good comment, Scott. I mean, I may suggest for consideration of all that if we have our templates, for the most part figured out, then we will know the input. And then once we know the input, we can also know which parties are involved, and who does what. So we could probably pepper the business case with that in mind as well. So that's like a immediate that can be the immediate next step.
Yeah, it turned out that in the energy management realm, and you've seen some of that, Mert, that it kind of started with kind of a discussion about the data, and it just ultimately evolved to what does that business process look like, and then it kind of got into a lot of real good discussions. So what you suggested is probably a good thing, but there's plenty of time to cover that in future meetings.
Yeah, I mean, schedule wise, if we can take a look at a template, in the next meeting, followed by an edited final draft version the meeting after, I think that would put us in I actually forgot our due date for our case study, but I kind of remember it was like summertime.
Right.
So that may be good to, that may give us some time to talk about the main, CMMS. That may give us some time to talk about some of the risk aspects we want to consider as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, that's it on my end. I'm, just if anybody wants to add anything, we have about a little over 5 minutes left on the clock, but we can finish early if we are done. Okay. Hearing none. I would like to thank you all for your participation today. It was more of a brainstorming discussion, but